Bob,
Hi,
thanks for being here.
my pleasure. Thank you for inviting me.
You flew all the way down to Medellin for this last weekend. We did a mastermind. You spoke at, you were there. This is actually your third time
Yes,
in Medellin. So
yes.
it's an honor to be here with you.
Thank you.
Thank you for coming down. And for anyone listening that doesn't know you already, if you could just very briefly introduce yourself, your background, business experience, and also, why you came down to Medellin and what you shared with the community here.
Yeah, terrific. Thank you. You're right. I've been down here 3 times, and it's been an enjoyable experience every single time. In terms of me and where I started, as you can tell, it was a long time ago. Right? I'm an old head, as they say now, and it's hard to believe that I'm here, but but that's where I'm at in life. I'll start with telling you that because there's an important thread that goes through my career, and it started working with at-risk adolescents 30 years ago. And effectively, I got handed a broom, if you will, to join this organization and really started to learn it top to bottom. And it was a school, a for-profit school for young adolescents that were having difficulties, and then a series of group homes across Southern California. While initially being handed the broom, ultimately became the CEO or the president of both of those organizations. And it was an interesting experience. One of them was a not-for-profit, which was the group homes spread across Southern California for adjudicated youth. And then the for-profit piece was the schools. So I got some exposure early on, and I had some really good mentors, some really good people that invested in me and taught me. And I did that for probably 10 years, and then transitioned into for-profit education and joined as a facility president of a campus, did well with that, became a regional vice president of operations, then a division president, and ultimately a COO. The thread through all of that is that I discovered in myself that purpose and mission is really important to me. Helping others, changing people's lives is important to me, as opposed to maybe selling widgets, which I would be capable of doing if somebody asked me to do that. But that doesn't bring me the satisfaction of going to work every day. And I think there's some people that are in alignment with what I'm saying, and they find real value in that. While running a good business. And so why do I come down here and help you or work with you? Because I was retired when I met you effectively. Mm-hmm. And you were curious. You knew a little bit about me and my background, and you had interest in doing some things. And you would dedicate yourself to coming to talk with me or picking up the phone, flying in, if you will, to airports and different locations across the country, Dallas, et cetera. And that really resonated with me. You are a young person who is unique. You're mature and motivated, and you stand out different from most people your age. And that really attracted me about you. And I had done a lot of mentoring when I was a COO. We get people from pretty large business schools that would come in and ask for some coaching and some training and some insights. And I really enjoyed that experience. And so when you asked if I'd be interested in coming down here 3 trips ago, the answer was without question, absolutely. Because I like to pay forward and give to people in the way that it was given to me early in my career, where I had those good leaders and those good mentors.
Amazing. And I don't want to gloss over your introduction too much. So just so people can get a understanding of the scale of you, the company's sizes that you worked at, right? Yeah. So if you don't mind sharing a little bit about that.
Yeah. So when I was running the nonprofits early in my career, my late 20s and early 30s, or the for-profit school, those probably were about $5 to $10 million, somewhere in that range. And then I made the transition to work in the for-profit sector with post-secondary education. And my first foray into that was probably about a $5 million piece of business. A year later, I'd done really well. I should say this, I probably built my reputation as a business person, taking over broken businesses, doing turnarounds, and it's a lot of work, but apparently I do it pretty good, right? So a year after I arrived to take over this school, I was living in Southern California, and I was asked to go to Houston and fix this location in the Houston market, and I did that. I did it pretty well, knock on wood. And then about a year later, I was asked, well, if you think you can do that, or you did do that, and you think you could apply those skill sets back in your home market in Southern California, we'd be really interested. We have 7 facilities, and collectively, they're all broken, right? They were all broken at the time. 7 facilities making something on the order of $2 million. It's just it wasn't sustainable. And I said, sure, I got to go home back into the LA market. Orange County, which is where I'm originally from. And I got going with that. Probably 3 years later, the 2 million was 45 or $50 million in business across the 7 facilities. And then one day, about 3 years into that, I got a call from the COO to come into his office, and there was sitting my boss at the time. This was a really awkward situation. My boss is sitting there, and the COO is sitting there, and the COO goes, hey, I just want you to know that today's your boss's last day, and I'll be announcing in about 10 minutes that you've been promoted to the division president. I was just stunned because of that experience, right, of being present in front of your boss and simultaneously getting a promotion. There's just a mixture of feelings. You're not quite sure how to process it all. But ultimately, I had scaled in that moment in time, in that instant. I had gone from 7 facilities and $50 million to 28 facilities and $350 million in business. And it was daunting. I was scared. I had a little bit of imposter syndrome that I was trying to deal with and come to terms with it all. And I had a lot of learnings, a lot of lessons that I learned in those moments over the next year or 2, 3, something along those lines. And then, ultimately the same thing kind of happened, that the COO moved on, and I was identified internally to move into that role, and that's what I did. And that was about $1.5 billion. And there was over 100 facilities, had about 15,000 employees. And it was a complex, organization, highly regulated. And so I've had good experiences. I've won a lot of battles. I've won a lot of wars, if you will, if you think about it in that context. But I've also had some very painful experiences and learnings along the way also. But effectively, for the last 10 years, I've been enjoying life, traveling back and forth between California and the Florida market, and specifically just north of Clearwater Beach in the Tampa area. So that's kind of the, genesis, cradle to hopefully not grave, but, from the beginning to where we're at right now.
Yeah. And you said that you really enjoy mentoring. I've known you for 3 years now, and you provided a ton of value, helping, mentoring, investing in me, that sort of thing. Yep. So I'd love to hear some of the mentors that you have had in your career and your life that have helped you, go up to that size scale and have that experience that you have today.
I would say that the skills I learned early on from the school that I described or the adolescent residential treatment facility that I was responsible for in my late 20s, early 30s. There was 3 primary principal owners at the time, and they all had unique skill sets. And they were very process-oriented, very systemic in how they did things, and very good about how they kept their finger on the business and understood how to set up meetings and follow up and documentation and all of that kind of stuff. And those were the infancy of my learning about business. And the principles and the concepts that I learned in that state, I have effectively applied across the entire rest of my career. The scale changes, it gets bigger, it gets larger, but the basic concepts about oversight, management of people, processes and systems, scalability were learned way back then, and they were applicable whether or not it's a $1 million business, a $5 million, 350, or $1 billion, right? There's some basic principles that you, if you practice, you'll have great oversight, command of your business, and know what's going on. Yeah.
What were some of the principles or foundation lessons that you learned that you're speaking of that you can apply to all these different sizes?
I think that, I think it's important to do when it's The smaller, the better, because the bigger it gets, if you haven't done some foundational things, it's like flying a plane and trying to change the wings on a plane in midair, right? It's just, is it almost impossible? Yeah. Is it theoretically possible? Perhaps. I don't know. But it just gets infinitely more difficult if you don't start doing things at the very early stages. And I'll start with people. And I always, every one-on-one I always have had with direct reports, every executive meeting I've ever started, it always starts with people, right? No matter what you're in, if you're in the business of selling water, if you're in the business of, making peanuts or whatever it is, people think that that's their business. And I would submit to you that you're in the people business. You either have external clients, and those are the people that you need to be aware of, or you have internal clients called your employees. And how you treat them, and how you develop them, and how you train them, and then how you hold them accountable, how you celebrate them, were some real key foundational concepts. Simple things like praising in public and coaching in private, being aware of your intensities if you're frustrated with somebody and how you can't allow that to come through. And then there's the fundamental business processes like, as an executive, you need to have with your direct reports one-on-ones. Again, people, trying to develop them and finding out how things are going with their business. People, how are they managing their people? Who's doing well? Who's not doing well? How are we applying training against them? And if we have, what's the accountability if they're not, if it's not sticking? What do your executive meetings look like? How do you scale your business? Do we have 10 people to one leader, or do we have 20 people to one leader? And can we be as effective with 20 as we are when we have 10, which is pretty much a fundamental understanding across business. You want to, maybe 8 to 10 direct reports. I mean, from bottom all the way up to the CEO, you don't want to get too many.
You said that you got known for and kind of built your career off turnarounds.
Yeah.
What is a one specific example of like the worst scenario that you went into?
Yeah.
Like, can you paint the picture of this was just a dysfunctional business unit and you came in and turned it around, and what was the approach to do something like that?
Again, people. So the first thing I always do, the most dysfunctional situation was the one that I described where I transitioned into a regional vice president of operations. You got 7 facilities, probably 500 employees spread out across them. And as I shared with you, ultimately they're making $40-50 million, but when I took over, it's $2 million. So that gives you context to how dysfunctional it was. And it's dysfunctional because everything that I described to you a minute ago about the foundations that are required as a good business person, one-on-ones, accountability, structure, things of that nature were all absent. So you have people doing all sorts of different things, and there's not alignment between departments and verticals and stuff. So when you first get into that situation, which I did, you really assess the talent very quickly. And usually, I'll oversimplify this, if there was 10 facilities, or 9 facilities, I guess would be better. Usually you could kind of, in a broken down piece of business, break it into 3 pieces. You've got those that you can identify pretty quickly are high performers and doing well despite the dysfunction of where they're working. There's this group in the middle. You don't know which way they're going to fall, right? They could either ultimately fall into the bucket of people that are working hard and they align with the structure and what I'm describing. And then there's the other third, or the part in here that falls into this other third, that's just very clear. They got to go. They're not a good fit, right? And so how do you do that? Well, you start with the leader of whatever that facility is, and you start having one-on-ones with them, and you start exploring through questions about what's going on within each of the verticals, and you can get a sense of what they know or what they don't know. And then you got to have discussions with the people that are direct reports for them. And you really kind of find out what their skill set and their attitudes are. And you have to start very quickly applying yourself to them and seeing if they're going to follow and get in line. And if they're not, you have to immediately replace them because they're toxic. And it's for lack of a better term, they become a cancer within the organism of that particular piece of business. It's, as I said, it's always people. And so what do I start doing? I start finding people with attitudes in the interview process that align with my attitude about accountability, attention to details, appreciation for good people, celebrating those people. And then you have to apply a lot of training against them. And if you do those things, identify what's going on quickly, start replacing people, and apply yourself to the training of those new people that are coming on board, suddenly you'll have an organization that starts to transform and do what it's supposed to be doing and what they should have been actually doing.
How do you go about replacing, like you go through that process, you have those 3 buckets, you identified everyone. Say you got 500 employees in this example.
Yeah.
Maybe a third of them, 150, I don't know, something to that magnitude, need to be replaced.
Yep.
How do you go about that? Is it all 50 of them are gone, or is it systematic?
Systematically, right? You gotta, scale yourself through that process. You can't go taking out everybody all at one time, right? But you've got to also figure out, of the good people, how to create kind of a firewall so they're not being effective negatively while you're working through the process of replacing these people. And the way I did it is you really have to over celebrate those folks and tell them how much you appreciate them, and have them value their experience with you more than listening to the people complain that are underperformers and not doing a really good job. Right. And it takes time, and you got to work through training and communication. And it's labor intensive. Although I was good at it, because I have as you know, an intense determination, a pursuit of relentless execution. It's labor intensive. I mean, it's 12 hours a day, probably for 4 or 5 months to turn something around that I'm describing.
Yeah.
And I would much prefer to run a well-oiled machine, as opposed to having to do that. But I do have the will, the strength, the tenacity to see something to the end, and that served me well.
And do you start with the leaders if you identify?
Absolutely.
The
Top
leaders
down.
are the first to go.
Either stay or go, right? And some of them. Yeah. So in the situation when I became the RVPO, I want to say there were 7 presidents. I probably replaced 5 of them in the first year, not all at once. I identified the one that had the facility that had the most potential and the one that was most disappointing, and tackle that. If, however, I found that somebody was kind of the leader, the dysfunctional leader, I would focus in on them. You got to cut those people out as soon as possible, right? And remove them and change the cultural attitude of what's going on. Yeah.
And the experience of doing a whole turnaround, I'm sure that the culture is going through this dysfunction, this chaos, because everyone knows, oh, did you hear that this person's they're firing, they're hiring, so it's kind of like this panic. How do you manage that with all of this chaos going on?
The people that I know that are good, they know they're okay, right? They're getting that time with me. And those that are having that panic, I'm okay with them having that panic. I want them off the bus anyway. Right? They can self-select out, or they can wait for me to help them. And if they self-select out, that just accelerates my process, makes it a little easier. It's, the HR process and going through the normal progression of steps before you terminate somebody. I get to accelerate it by them self-selecting out. Ideally, they all self-select out. In a perfect world, I would like that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so you're going into this this business unit and you identify people. I'm just trying to understand your systematic approach. You identify the people, you go to the people you know are good, and you tell them, look, this is what we're doing. This is the new direction we're going. Is that kind of the first initial step?
Yeah. So let's just say you're the president of a facility that's underperforming, and here comes Bob rolling in. He's your boss, and I'm going to sit down with you. One-on-one, probably the first week, we're going to sit down and I'm going to be a fly on the wall and watch you. I want to see what you're doing that's in alignment with what I know are best practices, and see what you're not doing, right? And then I'm going to start one-on-ones with you, and we're going to start having discussions. I'm going to ask, if you're not having one-on-ones, why is that? And let's start implementing them immediately, right? In an executive meeting amongst your leaders of the particular verticals that are within your particular business. And now I'm getting a chance to I've already spent a week with you. I see where your strengths and weaknesses are. Now I'm forcing you to bring in your individual direct reports, and I'm a fly on the wall observing what that looks like. What's the level of detail and understanding and conversations that you're having, and what's the transfer of information about where's the business at, what's going on with your employees, et cetera. And now I start making assessments about the next level down. This is an important piece I want to tell you. Let's just say that I think that you needed to be replaced. And I think that 2 people that report directly to you need to be replaced out of 8. I think an important thing in a turnaround is never do 2 levels at the same time. I do not want to change out the president and the director that reports to him at the same time. I want to do 1 level. Think of it. I got to change this level first. And when I've done that, now I'm going to go deal with this level. And when I'm done with that, I'm going to go deal with this level. But we don't want to take out 2 levels at the same time. It's too much change. And there's not enough institutional knowledge yet, because people that are coming, there's a vacuum of information that goes when you replace people. And if you do too many levels at the same time, it creates too big of a void.
So I want to talk about your experience coming down here, because we're right now in Colombia, South America, Medellin, and it's your 3rd time coming here to engage with the community that we have here. So what has your experience been coming from, you'd never been, I don't think you've ever been to South America before.
I've been to South America, but not Colombia for sure. Okay. Yeah.
So first time coming to Colombia was, I don't know, I think it was a year ago, maybe
15 months ago, maybe something like that. Sure.
So your first time coming, what was your kind of initial thought? Obviously you knew me and I was here, so you had that context. But first time coming, and then also just your experience these 3 times you've been here. Like, what has that been like?
So there's a thing in the U.S., and it was in the back of my mind also, that you hear the name Medellin, right? That has a connotation in the United States that usually is attached to a particular individual who was well known down here 20 years ago.
Yeah.
And there's not much done since then over the last 20 years in the way of the government communicating to other countries from a tourism perspective that, hey, we acknowledge what was, but what is now is different. And your question was, what were my initial thoughts? My initial thoughts were, is it safe in my head? But I think about that wherever I travel. And I've traveled all over the world, and that's probably what helped me just process it all, right? That at the end of the day, even if it wasn't a good situation, every city fundamentally, big city, there's 4 or 5 million people here somewhere, and same in Bogota, same in New York City or Chicago or LA, Bangkok, wherever you're at. Every city has areas that you got no business being in, and every city has places where you want to be. And that's no different here in Medellin. I see Medellin the same way I see Chicago, the same way I see LA. I don't go into certain sections of Chicago, LA, New York, and I don't think it's probably wise for me to go to certain sections in Medellin. But just like New York, Chicago, and LA, there's a Beverly Hills, there's a Miracle Mile, there's Times Square in Manhattan or whatever, where all the tourists go. And Medellin has that in spades also. It's just so beautiful. And my experience has been terrific, actually. I've really enjoyed myself coming down here. I think the people are fantastic. I think that it might be difficult sometimes to run a business here if you have to hire locally, because there's cultural difference in terms of what our expectations coming from North America are about whatever it is. No matter what country you're talking about, there's also always cultural differences. So, for example, when big companies take over or buy something in another country, the big challenge is, do I take somebody from here, meaning somewhere, my people, my best in North America, and do I send them over to country A, B, or C? Because I want them to understand my culture of how we're going to run the business. But in doing so, when they get there, they don't understand the culture that they're operating in. So then the other option is, well, I need to get somebody within the culture and hire someone local and somehow be able to communicate and cross-pollinate what our culture is and our expectations to that local person. And I think that that's probably a challenge here, like it is anywhere. If I came down here and wanted to run a business here specifically, you know, I've described to you a pretty structured process I have and what my expectations are about accountability and how to have meetings and what that should look like a little bit. And that could be a challenge here like it would be in any other country. And you just have to figure out how do you identify talent that has the right attitude, right? Can I find somebody with the right attitude and I'll train to the skills is what I often say.
Yeah. No, I've obviously being here, running the mastermind, the community from here, I've experienced, you know, what it's like to integrate that with a community that's from, you know, Canada, US, even Europe, and places where, you know, we have different cultural differences, like you were saying, right? And you know, it's got its pros and cons, right? There's first of all, coming here, like you said, it's amazing, it's beautiful.
Oh my God,
people
it's so
are nice,
pretty,
people are friendly.
Yes,
it checks all the boxes.
Absolutely, the weather,
and more everything.
Yeah.
So there's that. And then the cultural differences, which there's pros and cons to that as well, right? People value family more. People value spending time with friends.
There's things that as North Americans should embrace, right? Absolutely.
It's less materialistic, you know. So there's so many, and I think the pros way outweigh the cons, but then there's like a big one for us Americans coming down here is the time, right? A lot of us have this very like, okay, we're starting at 3, like I'll meet you here
at 2:55.
At 2:55, we're there, we're ready, we're waiting. But here it's a little bit different, which is just their culture, right? It's not wrong, it's not a bad thing, but it's something that you have to realize and adapt to,
manage.
Because if you come here and just expect people to understand how we operate without them experience our culture, right? And they've always had this lifestyle, then you're going to be very frustrated,
right?
If you don't set that expectation and, you know, train people and share how you expect it to be done if this is what your standards are.
I think in the example I gave you, like say I was going to, you know, buy a business in France. You know, the French have a different culture, or Italy, or whatever, and there's some similarities to what you're describing in all sorts of different countries that are different from the U.S., which is kind of unique in terms of how many hours a day, how many weeks a month, how many months in the year, how many vacation days people get. We're very driven in that way, right? And that's kind of unique to our culture. But if I was to hire somebody and I was a US-based company and I was buying something, or I was going to, you know, do a greenfield and open something up in a different market in a different country, I think probably the sweet spot or the answer to the problem is identify the talent in the country that you want to bring on board, bring them to you, and might be 3, 4, 5 months of indoctrination into the culture of our organization and learning, them learning about how we do things as much as me learning about what that looks like in their culture. So there's a bridging of the gap between what I want and what the culture is by bringing this person in and them educating me educating them, and then trying to pick their brain on how do we replicate what are the key principles that I need to be implemented over there, but done in a style that isn't off-putting to the people that are local, and using your style to manage within that culture.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. And I think this also applies just in a general sense to like turnarounds, because you're basically coming in, there's a current culture. And you're coming in and imposing a new culture that people aren't used to because they're so used to this.
Correct.
Right. So I think obviously, you know, there might be more differences or whatever nuances, but I think that kind of applies to both instances, right?
I think it absolutely does. And again, it's going back to, you know, are you hiring somebody that has an alignment in attitude and philosophical approach, right? Are you a high performer? Are you competitive, for example? Those are important things to me. But do you know how to manage yourself in a professional way and know how to coach and train people appropriately? You celebrate, you know, in public, and you coach in private, as opposed to some people have a style where they're going to just They're going to give you the gift of feedback, if you will, no matter what the environment is.
Yeah.
Yeah. No matter who's watching. And
Yeah.
that can be dysfunctional for sure.
Absolutely. And something you taught me and you share with the group, and, you work with some of the members in our community, mentor them, is situational leadership.
Absolutely. That's a great point. Yeah.
And so that applies to this, because I can't just, let's say I got employees here and I send a message, hey, we need to get this done. We need to do this. We need to do this, da, da, da. It's like, that's very off-putting because I didn't send the first message saying, hey, how are you?
Correct.
And then I wait for them to respond. Oh, I'm doing great. Thanks for asking. How are you? Oh, I'm good. Hey, by the way, we have all this stuff to do.
Correct. And what did it take you, an extra 5 seconds to write that? Or write a little honey, a little politeness, right?
Yeah.
We all appreciate politeness.
Yes.
Right. Instead of just jumping in with both feet straight into the business. It's like, hey, did you have a good weekend? How did it go? Tell me a little bit about it. What's 2 or 3 minutes of my time? That's terrific. I had a good weekend also. So over the weekend, I was thinking about X, Y, and Z. What do you think about this? Right. And you're bringing them along in a style and at a pace that's more palatable for them.
Yeah. I think you can get away with that a lot more in the US, but it's still
not acceptable there, right?
Maybe with like a peer on a high level, they get it. The time is, hey, this is what we're doing. This is what we need. This is what needs to happen. It doesn't matter how your week was. Like, this is the plan. We're doing this.
But I think as you get higher up in leadership, you still want, you even become more sophisticated and aware. It's not just about getting something done, but it becomes important about how you do it. And do you do it through like a bull in a china closet and you damage relationships, or are you inspiring and communicating enough that people will understand what you're trying to accomplish? They have alignment with you, and then they become a force multiplier for you. And that's really what I do when I do the turnaround. I got to isolate these good people over here, explain to them and communicate to them and create a vision that they understand and they're in alignment with, and then ask them to start permeating this down. They become a force multiplier because they become octopus arms for you, right? And they help you identify who the people are that don't have the right attitude. And that's really the big thing for me when you're thinking about a turnaround. It's people that don't have the right attitude, right? They're not appreciative of being there and the opportunity, and they don't want to be there. And that's okay. Not every single company and not every single position is right for every person. It's not a judgment about the person. It's just that this role isn't right for you, right? Like if you were a brain surgeon, I'm really interested if I have some problem cognitively to have a discussion with you about something and I want to depend on you. I'm not the right role if this was reversed, not being a brain surgeon, for you to start asking me questions about that. It's just not a right fit, right? It's whatever it is. And I don't want them running my business either, right? They have their specialty and I've got my specialty. We appreciate each other. And if there's a misalignment in terms of roles or abilities, let's just talk about it and let's move forward and let's move on. You'll be happier and I'll be happier.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. No, 1,000%. So I'd love to hear just, obviously I've known you for some time and we've gotten a lot of time together to connect on all different topics, business, personal, et cetera, et cetera. I'd love for you to share your background in the Navy, because you went to college. I think it was you went to college, then you went into the Navy. Is that right?
A bit of both. It was a combination. So, I was a young man, and I went off to college, and I thought at 6'2" with a 15-inch vertical leap that I was going to be the next Magic Johnson. It sounds silly, and I'm exaggerating, right? But I had done well in high school playing basketball, and I wanted to transition into the next level. And you come to the realization. I am not an athletic freak. You might be better than the majority of people skill-wise, but it's not transferable to anything. I went into the service, and I went into the Navy. I was on a nuclear submarine in the navigation side of the submarine, and I was based out of Connecticut, and I was based out of Holy Loch, Scotland. And I was on what they called an SSBN, the Andrew Jackson. It was, I think, the boat 619 of the Gold Crew. I'll give you all the details. There's 2 crews. But we would live in a place called, well, the base was in Groton, Connecticut. I actually lived in Mystic, Connecticut when I was not on the sub. And then we would fly over to Scotland and meet the blue crew. There was 2 crews. I was the gold crew. They were the blue crew. And when they were out, we were back in Connecticut. And then when they came in, we would fly over, spend a couple of weeks, do a handoff or turnaround of the boat, hand everything off, make sure that there's been a complete communication about what's going on with the boat. And then they would leave, and then we would head out. And we'd head out for like 100 days, So it was
for 100 days you'd be underwater.
Yeah. Yeah.
And how many people was on this?
It varied. If we were doing something special, there might be some special riders that were with us. Let's say maybe it's the Navy SEALs, and they have a mission that they need to do. They might be going via a submarine to the location, and then going from the submarine onto the land, and then coming back and getting out of that situation. And in those circumstances, you might be carrying 110 people. If you didn't have that kind of a circumstance happening, probably be 95, something like that, 95 to 100. It just kind of depends.
So it's a pretty large ship.
My God. So think about something 3 stories high in the length of a football field. I mean, you couldn't put it in a stadium, right?
It's massive.
It's gigantic. You're going to put 16 nuclear missiles in there, right? The missile silos basically on a boat. So you can imagine how high and big that is. You got a reactor plant compartment. You've got the missile compartment. You got the torpedo room up forward. You got to have living quarters. There's the control room, sonar rooms. There's all sorts of stuff, right? So you need a lot of space.
Yeah. I'm just thinking what it would be like to be underwater for 100 days.
Yeah,
it's like you're in this football field sized submarine.
Yeah,
and you're with these same 190 people, all guys, 100 days.
Yep. And I think that of course, there's all sorts of jokes about about that, but I think that was probably one of the things that helped me connect with people the best. You have to have testing and make sure that you're going to be compatible. So somehow you have to be a little bit of an introvert. Don't mind being self-reflective, reading, learning, appreciating quiet time. There's really no choice but to be okay with that. But also not be so much of an introvert that you don't create relationships and dependencies with the other people on the boat. And I'd have to say, as a young man, a lot of arrogance, just a little humility, but a lot of arrogance. And when you get put into that kind of a situation with people with varying backgrounds, coming from different lifestyles, it forces you to quit looking internally all the time and being very selfish and start figuring out ways to connect with other people and appreciating what other people bring through their life experiences. Yeah. And that was a huge lesson for me. Probably the biggest takeaway that I have for being in the service was that experience. Yeah, it was. I don't think I would be here today, or would not have had the successes that I had I not had that experience. It humbled me a little bit, right? And you quit being a little haughty, and you become a little more humble, and because your life depends on Joe Blow over there from Alabama, who you don't normally resonate with. They grew up on a farm, and I grew up in LA, and my father's a doctor. Right. So we come from different worlds, and normally our two worlds would not, cross, and there wouldn't be any interest in as a young person. As an older person, I'm interested in everybody. All right. I like hearing about life experiences and people's journey. But when you're young, it's all about me, me, me. It's always, and so that was huge. It made me look at people and differently and be less self-centered, I think. Yeah.
Yeah.
I think it made me a better leader ultimately.
That's amazing. Yeah. I just try to think of what that, like, the thing that comes to mind is like what you did in the submarines for 100 days sounds like some Mr. Beast YouTube video, if you know who that is, like doing these 100-day underwater challenge or 100 days in a circle with these people. Yeah. And those things, you see him do those on videos. It's for entertainment purposes, of course. But
there's a soberness to your purpose. You're sitting on a piece of machinery dependent upon 95 or 100 other people, and they on you for survival and making sure that people do a terrific job at what they're supposed to do, because it's life or death. If they do it poorly, you could die. And then beyond that, if they do it well, you're sober because your purpose and your mission is being a part of the triad. And the triad is a destructive outcome if it has to be executed, right? There's 16 nuclear missiles. There's probably 10 warheads on each of them. You effectively got 160, bombs on 16 missiles. And so that's sobering, right? You hope you never have to, experience anything like that. Yeah, you talk about Mr. Beast and it's funny or this or that. It's not so funny. It's serious, right? I mean, your life depends on survival of the person that's next to you and they with you in case something happened. And I had problems. There was times I was very scared. Times that I thought I might die, for sure. Yeah, scary stuff.
What were some of those stories, or what happened?
I lost an executive officer one night in the North Atlantic. Horrible storm. Probably 50-foot, 60-foot seas, 70-foot seas, something along those lines in the middle of winter. And what people don't know is that those swells are so great that you could literally, at 80 feet underneath the water, the swells are so powerful they could suck the submarine to the surface. And now you got a cylinder sitting on the surface with 70-foot waves spinning like this, right? It's not like a normal boat. So you're literally walking on, if this happened to you, you're walking on the walls, and then the walls, and everything is coming off the sides that isn't tied down. And on one occasion, we had a problem with the nuclear reactor plant in a storm like that, and we had to change propulsion systems, the battery or the diesel or whatever it was. I'm so old now that it's hard to remember the specifics of it. But in that storm, we had a really bad situation. And the XO, the executive officer, was up in the control room, as was I. It was nighttime. And over my head, there was a fathometer, I guess is what you call it. It's like a box, probably like this, and it was bolted on. And for some reason, they literally went flying across the room and hit the XO in his calf. And it was a couple days later, I was asked to, get us to someplace close to Reykjavik, Iceland, bring in a helicopter that person off, the XO off the boat. And when we got back from the patrol, the blood clot had been so bad that it caused, an amputation below the knee. So that was a scary time for him. I've had our boat go deeper than it was supposed to, and it was scary. And yeah, there's just lots of different experiences.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, I only can imagine. So deep sea.
It's scary. Yeah.
So let's shift gears. Talk more about your experience with these companies that you grew in.
Yeah.
Right. So at one point you were a COO. There was 15,000 employees. You guys were operating over $1 billion, and everything was going really well. Mm-hmm. And some of us know, some of us don't know, but during this same period, I think what year was this, like 2008, 2005?
2014, 15, yeah, probably about 10 years ago, 11 years ago.
Around that time, there was a lot of things that happened to that industry.
Yeah.
And ultimately, what ended up happening is a lot of the companies had to get shut down. So I'd love to hear from the inside, what actually happened in those in that time, and what was like what actually happened?
I think the lesson learned is that you can have the best processes, you can have the best systems, you can have internal audit teams, you can have yourself be audited by regulatory bodies, both at the federal, state level, or at a program level. You can shine in all of those reviews, but in what I'm describing, I kind of felt like a canary in a coal mine, because I see what I'm going to describe accelerating right now as sort of a playbook. What I've noticed is that there's been a marriage of politics and ideological viewpoints melding, and then using regulatory bodies to execute what it is that they want or don't want. All right. So if you're a Democrat, you have certain pet things that you like and certain things that you don't. And it's the same for the Republicans, right? So I'm agnostic in terms of the political party, because both sides execute this playbook well now, and it's accelerating. And so from my experience, I had a particular political party that was once in complete alignment with what our mission and purpose was, and really supported the growth of the organization until some point in time, and you don't know when it is, but you then become too big and they don't really care for you, right? So the experience is quite mind-boggling. You just can't really believe that it's happening, and it's happening in slow motion, like a car accident in slow motion, where they come at you because they want you to go away. And they did. They came after us. And our problem was, and this is a big lesson for any organization, our business model was designed. Imagine if the government came to you and said, hey, we want to do trades, and we need more skilled labor in the country. Would you create programs that help develop plumbers, nurses, dental hygienists, whatever it is? I'm just making electricians, whatever it is. And they go, listen, you make available all the federal funds that we want to provide for this process. And you go, sure. The only caveat is that there has to be a 10% buffer between what we will provide you in total costs for the program and what the actual program costs. So if I said differently, if they have $9,000 of federal funding that's available for every student to go to school, you need to set your program cost at $10,000. What you're doing now is you're creating a dependency of 90% of your revenue coming from one stream, one source, right?
Yeah.
And each year they subsequently go and provide a little bit more funding for the student, but you got to create this 10% gap. So I'm not really in control of my pricing at this point. Every time the federal government wants to increase the availability of resources and funding for a student, I automatically have to adjust my pricing by 10%, right? And so in that process, you're doing well, you're making money, there were several of us that did it better than the rest. And we became ultimately publicly traded. Particular ideologies and political parties, being publicly traded is kind of not what they appreciate. And so you go from being a darling in providing a service to underserved students to suddenly becoming a pariah. And they're wanting to carve out anybody that's anybody that's publicly traded, and then just leave the smaller trade schools that are privately held leaving there on in the sector. And that happened to me. And the lesson is, as I was saying to you, it doesn't matter if you do everything right. And you can't believe this, but it's true, and people are experiencing it now, and I'll give you some examples in a second, but you can do everything right. You can be the darling of one party at one moment, and the next moment that party turns on you. If a lot of your revenue comes from that location, from the federal government by way of example, you're in big trouble. So what does that look like today? What would it look like, what I'm describing in practice right now? In the last week, Harvard is in the crosshairs. Who would ever have thought Harvard would be in the crosshairs of the federal government? This is arguably one of the finest, if not the finest institution in the entire world, right? The thing that separated them from us is they have a $55 billion endowment. So they can, if they have challenges, take a long view on dealing with that particular challenge and be able to battle and have enough time to maybe change the government changes to a different political ideology, and they get out of the crosshairs. But Harvard right now has had, as I understand it, all their federal funding suspended by the Department of Education, and they are now weaponizing this department, the State Department, and threatening or are cutting off the visas for every one of their international students, which represents about 30% of their population. If they didn't have a $55 billion endowment, they would have suffered what I suffered, which is you can't sustain it. You have to shut things down. You can't survive without funding, and you just don't understand, as I'm sure Harvard is right now going, they're sitting there, they have to be, because I've been in that room before in my experience. You're just like, what is going on? It's insane and it's crazy. In our case, they paused funding. 90% of our revenue comes from the federal government. They make a position. They did this with all the publicly traded. They have a position that they don't want that particular sector to have publicly traded businesses. So they pause funding with no $55 billion endowment. They weaponize attorney generals to make accusations. They paint a narrative in the public, just like what's happening to Harvard, cutting off the funds, weaponizing the State Department, and doing different things like that to affect the school and the business. Where else do we see it? We see it with I'll give you another example. I see Mark Zuckerberg last year under a different administration being called into Congress and just being grilled about, and not just him, but other big media, social media sources. And it's about content moderation and truth and how accurate is the information and just getting grilled, right? And really thinking about threatening that particular organization is kind of the viewpoint that was going on a year or 2 years ago. Now, never another administration. Where's Mark Zuckerberg? Sitting in the Oval Office. He went from, villain to hero to villain, and you're just in the breeze as this goes on. Another one would be Tesla. You've got Elon, whatever you think of him, but he was the darling of one particular political party with his, green energy, if you will, with battery power. And his business was really probably built on the back of a particular sector of society. People might label them liberal or however they want to view them. But it's that same party today that is contributed to 70% loss in stock value. 50% of their earnings in Europe are gone. People are burning his cars.
Yeah.
And it's not because the product sucks. It's because he went to the other side and started working with the other side, right? And it's just been weaponized. And it's a scary playbook that's being executed depending upon the whims of which party's in place and what their ideological viewpoint is. And it's a real threat for businesses, right? It's a scary thing because you can do everything right, and one day you wake up and you find out that there's things that are outside your control. I call it, the ground shifts beneath your feet, right? And it's just an awful experience. It is, it's 10 years now gone by, and I still don't, you're still kind of just processing it all. And with it accelerating into these other sectors and me observing the same sort of playbook being executed against them, it helps me kind of process it a little bit better now, watching it happen to other people. Not that it's the right thing for sure.
Yeah, it's crazy knowing the forces that have all this power, like unlimited power, like literally they can do anything. And it's been happening for decades. And I think that a lot of people don't know about it until more recently when there's formats like this with podcasts. There's I've heard stories recently of these, I forget what they're called, but like regulatory
regulatory bodies.
They're debanking certain industries. They're literally taking the ability to have a bank because there's these certain AI companies that they already identified that are going to we're only going to have 3 of them. So anyone who tries to compete, boom, you're out of the game because we say so. Yeah. There's nothing you can do about it.
And when it happened to us, I felt like we were the canary in the coal mine. Back then, I would describe it as like, I feel like I'm in Russia and Putin's decided he wants my company. He's just taking my company from me and there's no recourse. And there's no recourse. Yeah. It's unbelievable. And they paint this horrible narrative. Of course, the only purpose is to shut down the business, but they make it personal and they attack you. They make it implied that you're doing something wrong. Of course, all that they do is shut down the business. There's never any follow through on what the accusations are because there's no there. It's just the means by which you're creating a narrative, smearing, and shutting something down. It's happening to Tesla right now, right? It's happening to Harvard right now. And it's just, it's scary. And I'll tell you something that people don't talk about is, the personal impact it has on you, where family and friends and colleagues and view you and respect you and value your viewpoint and what your ethics are. And now you got to go to Thanksgiving dinner and this huge narrative, or Christmas, or a birthday party, and even your closest people, you worry that maybe in the back of their mind, are they wondering because of what they read versus how they know me and what they know about me? And it's incredibly isolating. And very difficult emotionally. Yeah, it's something that people don't talk about. And it's just wrong. Like, when they went after Enron, there was smoke. They didn't just shut down the business. The executives went to jail, right? They made an accusation, and because there was there, they send the executives to jail, right? There's personal liabilities when you're a publicly traded company. And the proof is what happened. Well, they shut it down and they didn't care after that. Not one person, not one executive was ever investigated. Not one interview, nothing, just the smear.
Yeah.
Right. And it's awful.
Yeah. I remember you telling me, so you can look up articles from that time, and they'll say they were lying about placement rates. Right. They were, all these deceiving things. Yep. But then we had this conversation, and you can. I don't remember the exact facts, but you said maybe there was this program. There was like 10 people, and and then they use these numbers to like make it seem like there's this huge lie going on. When in reality, it's just like. So
imagine, right. Numbers can be played to tell a story. So if I have to report on 10. And tell you that there's between this morning and this evening, there was 10 almonds that were consumed. And you have to report that at the end of every day. And somebody makes a mistake and says, and I'm talking about a cohort this small, right? Like not even barely double digits. We're not talking thousands or hundreds or tens of thousands. We're talking like 10, 12, 15. You can use the absolute number to dimension it. Or I could say to you, hey, somebody made a mistake on 10 and actually it was 8, right? That dimensions it probably more accurately for you, and you kind of understand what the order of magnitude is. Or I could say to you, hey, you're lying by 20%. That's meaningful. That is a huge delta. How do you miss the boat by 20%? Well, it's about numbers and what story it is that you want to tell. The proof is that if there was any there, you would have had an outcome for people that would have involved, legal problems. And there's just no there. There's right. And I don't know what's going on with Harvard. I don't know if there's there, but I don't know that they deserve to have 30% of their business choked off by removing 30% of their student population. I don't know. And how do you go from darling to pariah? And, the next administration will come back in and will probably have a Harvard graduate as president. I'm just speculating. And they'll be darlings again. Right. And well, by the way, I heard this administration, I think it was last week or the week before. Remember, we went from darlings to pariah as a sector. And now I heard last week going, well, this piece of $3 billion, there's greater numbers of federal funding that the Harvard gets. We're going to take $3 billion of that number that we're going to deny you. And guess what they're going to do? I think we're going to give it back to the trade schools. Right. So you go from darling to pariah to now the elites are the pariah. Now the trade schools are OK. And it's just like in the wind and swinging. Changing. Oh, my God, it's horrible. Yeah.
So let's end this on a high note.
Yeah.
What has your experience been? You've come down 3 times and you've seen the evolution of the community that we built, the Entrepreneur House, right? You've interacted with a number of different people that have been part of it. You're working with some of the members one-on-one, helping them grow their businesses. Mm-hmm. So what has your experience been meeting the community, interacting, mentoring? Like, what has that been like for you?
It's been really inspiring. I'm again, because I'm an old hat, and I got kids that range from 33 to 39 years old, 3 of them are granddaughters, et cetera. And when you come from one generation, you always think your generation is doing better or is different and had a different level of intensity or purpose to get things done than the next generation that follows you. And there's always this, you're kind of thinking, man, I don't know. Are they snowflakes or whatever the term is, right? They're not tough enough, right? They don't have it. And it has been so inspiring. It's as transformational a view to look at it through a different prism and through a lens as it was what I described coming from a very cocooned bubble as a young man into the Navy and being exposed to something. It was transformational in terms of my viewpoint. And how's it been? It's been inspiring. Right. I mean, there are some remarkable people doing just incredibly talented, self-motivated, incredibly smart people doing remarkable work. And it fascinates me quite candidly because some of them are doing really, really, really well. I think that less than half of, I think if you had a $10 million business, you would be in the 99.5% percentile of all businesses in the world. I mean, just process that, right? If you could make, and that's kind of like a norm with your group, right? That's just kind of like, pretty close to a starting point almost for them. And so you're dealing with these young folks that are extremely elite. They understand the world that we're in today. They know how to message to their audience in a way that's far more sophisticated than I am. In fact, they go to school on me trying to understand how to scale things and do things that we were talking about earlier about how do you manage and scale things. But I'm going to school on them. I'm fascinated about this new world of marketing and social media and how do you package stuff and how do you tell the story and how do you get the best possible outcome and understanding the pace of it all. It's as educational for me as it is for them. And they are terrific and very talented people. I don't need to tell you that. I mean, you deal with them daily. But they're phenomenal group. That's been my experience. And I've had exposure 3 different times to probably a good portion of your house, right? Yeah. And I've done conference calls or Zoom calls and spent dedicated time to make myself available for Q&A to the other group that I haven't seen personally. And so, they're good people. Yeah.
And I just have to thank you again for, coming down to Medellin, spending your time, investing your time with the group. Myself personally, like I said, we've known each other for 3 years and you've seen my transformation.
Oh my God.
In those 3 years.
Yes.
And you've been a big contributed factor in helping me develop through those different periods of business and leadership and all of the
trials and tribulations. Yes,
absolutely. So I just have to thank you again for coming down, sharing your wisdom with us. And also I just want to say anyone who's listening to this, watching this and would like to connect with you, you're working with some people now. If someone wants to just have a conversation with you, maybe run some ideas, they have a problem, how can they, obviously if they're in the group, they can reach out to me and I'm happy to connect. Anyone else, how can they reach out and get connected with you?
Yeah, you could do it a couple of ways. You could go to BosicConsultingGroup.com and you can access and get on my calendar that way. You could directly email me if you prefer to do that. I'm fine with that as well. And you could get a hold of me at BosicConsultingGroup@gmail.com. I think that's between you and those 2 ways, you could get on my calendar pretty fast, and we'd be able to connect and figure out if it's a good fit. It may or may not be for either of us. I might not be the best value for you or be what you specifically need, but maybe I am, and we could figure that out on a call.
Yeah. Amazing. Well,
all right,
Bob, thank you.
Thank you. Pleasure. Appreciate it. Thanks.